Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to the Engage podcast. It's great to be with you, Peter.
Good to be with you too, James.
Obviously, we are yet again in a brand new environment, and no, Christchurch Haywood Heath has not had a monumental upgrade, but we're actually on all-staff residential.
Indeed, we are.
Do you know where we are?
Northamptonshire.
Northamptonshire. We've never been here before, but Christian Conference Centres, they own Hayes and Swanwick, and they own Highley. Normally we go to Highley, but for this one, we are here in Northamptonshire. Verdict so far?
Well, this room is stunning, isn't it? It does feel like the kind of room in which there's about to be a murder. And Poirot is going to come in and solve it.
Yes, and actually that's what this podcast is going to be about. It's going to be about a murder mystery. No, I'm only joking.
Lead piping.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, I think the other thing to say is this is not necessarily what our new film studio in our Romney Street office is going to look like.
Yeah.
Even film studio, I've said this before, is probably too grand. However, I did a site visit last week and
how was it?
It was tremendously exciting. Praise God for his faithfulness, the provision of the funds. It's really exciting to see the steel work going in so we can build the new disability access in the entranceway, the new reception area. We were looking at signage and logos, but in the basement, we've opened up the space. We're going to put paneling in so we can create instant video content in a much, much more efficient way, which is just really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to talk about one topic on this podcast. We are very conscious that when we published our last podcast, and thank you to everyone who's engaged with that and enjoyed it, we did it the day after a by-election, and we were very pleased with ourselves because we were reacting to political news in the moment. And then the very next day, the US and Israel launched a series of significant strikes against Iran.
Indeed. I mean, I guess for the classic phrase, a week is a long time in politics.
Absolutely.
It didn't even take that, did it?
No, it took less than 24 hours.
It really does. It does show you. You think the big story is going to be one thing, and then suddenly the world has really changed.
Absolutely. Now, you might remember, it was kind of late December, there were mass protests in Iran. Each time you're thinking, is this it?
Yeah.
Is this going to be the reversal of the 1979 revolution?
Yeah.
What was, I think, different about the uprisings in December and into January, they were the biggest since 1979. And the Iranian regime, which is an Islamic republic, they cracked down very heavily. There was really a massacre of protesters. Estimates varied. So, for example, the US-based human rights activist news agency, they reckon 7,000 people were killed by the Iranian regime. The Iran government said it was more like 3,117, and then some health officials from Iran and from the US said could be as high as 32,000.
Yeah.
So it's classic. We just don't know. But what we can say is that represents a significant loss of life and a reminder of the brutality of this regime. I think that's worth noting.
Yeah, and I guess we'll come on to that again, won't we, when we talk about how to interpret and
Absolutely.
What's been going on.
Yeah.
I guess Iran has been a bit of a rogue state for some time, particularly with its nuclear program, hasn't it?
That's right, yes. No, and in the background, for example, in late Jan into early February, Iran and the US were actually holding negotiations, indirect negotiations, about Iran's nuclear program. You may remember last year there were strikes by the US and Israel directly targeting Iran's ability to produce, to do basically enrichment of uranium to prevent them from developing nuclear weapons. Reports were suggesting that there could have been some kind of breakthrough, but they were countered then by comments by the US government. And eventually, we discovered that Israel and Saudi Arabia really lobbied Donald Trump very heavily to attack Iran. And so on the 28th of February, US missiles and drones and Israeli jets began striking Iranian targets. And this was called Operation Roaring Lion.
Yep.
And it's worth also adding that most of the commentary since then has reflected that this is a real military intelligence coup. The Israelis, through Mossad, they managed to hack into Tehran's traffic cameras. So they managed to observe patterns that led them to believe the top brass were gathering, of the Iranian government and military, were gathering in the supreme leader's compound. And so that meant they targeted it at a very specific time. So Khamenei, who has been the supreme leader in Iran for a very long time, he was killed in the attack. And we now know that his son, I think it's pronounced Mujtaba, he has been designated as the next supreme leader of Iran. And where we're at now is a lot of Iranian top brass military government officials have been killed. And so really, Trump has claimed this is all about regime change. He wants the people to rise up. They're continuing to hit targets. There isn't evidence, as we record this, of a kind of mass popular uprising that maybe some people were expecting.
Yeah.
And the other kind of angle on this, which is just worth saying as I kind of bring this section of summary, just filling things into a close, you've got on the one hand, Trump claiming massive victories. You've got some middle powers like Canada, Australia coming out saying we support the war and we support what the Americans are doing and the Israelis are doing. Britain has adopted a more cautious approach, no to joining in offensive operations, but yes to defending our assets and our civilians in the Gulf, in the Middle East, and in Cyprus. However, there has been a lot of criticism of the British government for being slow in its response. It's only, I think it was today, or maybe yesterday, that a Type 45 frigate called HMS, I think it's HMS Destroyer. I could have got that wrong. But this ship, Dragon, it might be HMS Dragon. Anyway, it's Dragon. That ship that's been in Portsmouth has finally set sail. And then there was the Prince of Wales aircraft carrier was going to go and join, but now it's not going to go and join.
Yeah.
So we'll come on to that. But near Iran, there's something called the Strait of Hormuz.
Indeed.
And a lot of oil passes through that as it kind of then goes out to the wider world. And so there's huge concerns. The soft closure of that strait is currently going to impact energy prices, insurance, aviation, shipping, and ultimately for British consumers and other European consumers, the price of gas.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if you've seen your petrol prices going up, as we did when we were coming back from holiday the other day, this is why.
This is why,
like, we are part of a globalised world. What happens in one corner of the world affects us here in the UK. It's not just like conflicts only have their local effects anymore.
Yeah, and that's why, for all that we support the principle of borders, we think borders are biblical, we think we see them in Scripture, that it's never supporting nation states and borders to the expense of recognizing our mutual dependence upon one another, especially because you're right, we do live in a globalized economy. And I also think that, it's worth adding in, perhaps before we get to the impact on us and Britain, the reaction of the Iranian regime was to immediately launch missiles in what seemed like a really kind of scattergun approach.
Yeah.
This was launching missiles at Kuwait International Airport, at Tel Aviv in Israel, a missile launched as well against United Arab Emirates, Dubai, Bahrain's capital. I mean, it was one of those moments where you kind of like, we feel so insulated and protected from all of that here, but how terrifying for those who were in those places, especially places like Dubai that have built their reputation on being safe havens.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one of the things actually which I think that helpfully brings out is that, again, Iran does not exist in its own little bubble. Iran has been a major player in geopolitics of the Middle East, and in particular in its dealings with Israel. So Iran has, I guess, sponsored terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, who, I guess in Hamas's case, then launched those direct attacks on Israel in the October attacks in 2023. But yeah, you're right. So some of it did feel pretty extreme in terms of Iran's response. So you also had Iran firing at Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
You had them firing at Cyprus, which is where the UK has an RAF base, and that's partly why Keir Starmer's, we could call it dithering, or his reticence to get involved. That's partly why it's been so criticised. It's because there are UK soldiers who are there. But yeah, Iran exists within this broader context. So yes, they've had their nuclear program. That's really significant. But they have been trying to control affairs in the Middle East by sending these proxy groups, particularly to disrupt Israel.
Yeah, and so again, there are layers of complexity in this conflict.
Completely.
And, it's worth just saying that we don't know everything about what's going on here, and I think it is fair to kind of challenge some of the assumptions that seem to have been made around if we attack Iran in this way, there could be regime change, there could be this mass kind of uprising. And I think it is not wrong to be cautious and to learn lessons from the West's previous attempts at such things.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
I don't want to sit here, and I think you're the same. We don't want to sit here and kind of go, we've removed a tyrant. On the one hand, I think, amen, isn't that good news?
Yeah.
But a tyrant to be replaced by another tyrant.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess now we're starting to get into how should we respond to this as Christians. But I think that's absolutely right. I guess people always talk about history as being studying from and learning from the mistakes of the past.
Exactly.
Well, you've got a very recent example, which keeps on coming up actually in discussions, particularly in the Labour Party.
It's a Labour Party problem, isn't it?
Yeah, but sort of talking about, well, look what happened when we got involved in Iraq, and then that thought process. And that's definitely been part of what Keir Starmer has been thinking about, I think.
Definitely. And I think it's interesting as well, because he's received criticism from Tony Blair, who, of course, has never really changed his mind around the Iraq war, not publicly anyway. And he has said very explicitly, according to media reports, that there are places to support the Americans, basically, no matter what. Now, I find that extraordinary.
Yeah.
You know, why? Why should we support the Americans? If we don't think that what the Americans have done is especially wise, what possible duty are we under? Or is it the case that our armed forces are so depleted that actually it's a pragmatic decision for our own survival and protection as a nation?
Yeah, I guess you've got an interesting tension, haven't you? Because on the one hand, we are a sovereign state. We are not America's vassal.
I mean, we used to own them.
Indeed. But I guess the other part of the equation is we are America's ally. Yeah. And sometimes being an ally means that you do end up in conflicts which you yourself would not have had a stake in otherwise. Yeah,
it's interesting to me that this is kind of an embryonic thought, so step and correct this. Well, no, I was trying to think of, you can't draw from this an absolute conclusion. You can't read across directly onto present day.
Go on.
But it is striking, isn't it, in the Old Testament? There are very few examples of the people of God, Israel, forming allegiances with other nations and it ending well.
Yeah.
More often than not, it leads to corruption. It goes badly. I mean, there's the great kind of oracles against Israel. Do not rely on Egypt, even though Egypt was a superpower. Now, it's different because you can't draw a comparison between Britain and Israel, as some seem determined to do. However, I do wonder whether there is surely at least a principle that says, you must have a degree of self-sufficiency as a nation state, and yet at the same time, it is wise to look for allegiances that will help protect your citizens. And that is, after all, a God-given duty on our government. Our government must protect British assets. It must protect British civilians. It doesn't actually have a choice. It must do that. And I find myself in a slightly odd position where I'm not convinced that Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, is the best man to be Prime Minister, or indeed the best person to be Prime Minister. But the position where we've ended up of not involved in the offensive, but finally getting round to operating defensively, I am more comfortable with.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I think one of my big reflections, and this really came through actually if you read our long read last Friday around the whole conflict, is essentially how uncertain I feel about almost every part of it.
And it's just humble to say that, isn't it?
Well, and I think it's
just true.
It's just true, isn't it? There's so much here which we don't fully understand. And in a sense, the only thing when I wrote that piece which I was comfortable putting some certainty into was, on one level, I'm glad that Khamenei is dead.
Yes.
Because he ran a really evil regime. Yes. And so I think it's just worth sketching out some of the things which that regime did. I've got some notes here. So Khamenei's Iran swore that it would accomplish the complete destruction of Israel.
Yeah.
And it supported multiple sectarian terrorist groups in the Middle East. It attempted to organise over 20 lethal terrorist attacks here in the UK within the last year.
Yeah.
It executed almost 5,000 civilians simply for being gay. Yeah. And it attempted to acquire nuclear weapons, which, if you put that within the context of swearing to accomplish the destruction of Israel, is really quite concerning. So this was not a nice regime, and we've seen that. You've already sketched out the response to the most recent protests. There were protests in 1999, in 2009, in 2011, in 2017, in 2018, in 2019, in 2022, two. One of the stories which I read in the aftermath of these most recent protests, I thought, gosh, that is just sickening. Where there's this absolutely awful story about women who'd been arrested in recent protests. I don't know whether you saw this one.
Yeah.
Where they were being sexually assaulted by their captors, and then the Iranian military were trying to cover it up by cutting out their wombs. And you think, gosh, this is an awful regime, and I'm very glad the person who was in charge of it was dead on a purely justice level.
Well, absolutely. And actually, that whole angle on this, which is that this is a country that treats women, that treats girls particularly abysmally, but also it's an evil regime. And from a Christian perspective, I can be glad and rejoice that an evil regime has suffered such a crippling blow. Yeah. And actually, I think that's part of how we pray in response. I think it's not wrong to pray, whatever you might think about the US-Israel actions and the offensive, you can still pray, as you can pray for any unjust regime around the world, that God would, to use language of the imprecatory Psalms, that God would bring his enemies down.
Well, and that's exactly where I would have taken it too, is you look at the Psalms, and people are praying for God to effectively wreak his justice upon evildoers.
And actually, this is one of the context in which the imprecatory Psalms can and should be used. Yeah. And we're struggling to know what to pray. Psalm 68, verse 1, may God arise, may his enemies be scattered, may his foes flee before him. May you blow them away like smoke as wax melts before the fire. May the wicked perish before God, but may the righteous be glad and rejoice before God. May they be happy and joyful. I mean, that immediately gives me a context to say, yes, pray that this evil regime will now fall, that there will be regime change to a point where there is greater freedom, where there's greater liberty, where the church no longer has to be underground but can come overground. I mean, what's amazing is we know from some reports that the church in Iran, even under oppression, has grown. And this is just classic of how the Lord works, that he is not limited by a regime that hates the gospel, hates the church, hates Jesus, hates Christianity, treats its citizens appallingly. I mean, it's an incredibly male-centric regime. It's not a place where the equality, the God-given equality of men and women as image bearers of God is acknowledged or respected. And I think it's okay to criticize the religion that lies behind some of that. It's okay to say, and this is not, might well fall foul of new government regulations, but to say actually there are the way that Islam has been interpreted and enforced in the Republic of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, is evil because of the damage it has done to people made in God's image. And I think that's what you said was so helpful around, there's lots we can't be certain about. So let's focus more on what we can be clearer about. And I think that is one area.
Yeah. Okay. If we were to go then just sketching out some things which we are less certain about. Yeah. Here's my first one.
Yeah, do it.
The American president. Goodness me, I never know quite what he's going to do next.
Well, he's out bombastic, and it's how bombastic he is.
No,
lives are being lost, and that includes civilians. I mean, there's still not certain. There's still ambiguity around. Was it a US strike that hit a girls' school that led to lots and lots of little girls being killed? And you can bet your bottom dollar if it is, they'll try and cover that up. Trump's out there telling everyone that, we've destroyed this, they got no Navy, they got no Air Force. In other words, I'm a genius, I've won. Yeah. But you're like, hold on a minute, I don't see Iran kind of coming out of the old regime and becoming this new beacon of democracy in the Middle East. I don't see any evidence of that.
Absolutely not. And you know that when that doesn't happen, he will then put out something saying, Iranian people, you missed your chance.
It's their fault.
Exactly. Yeah. When have we ever seen him take responsibility?
But also, this is a president who made his reputation, such as it is, on I'm the guy who doesn't get us into foreign wars.
No, I know.
But I do think there's a lot to be said about this is Trump trying to kind of establish a legacy. If he can be the one who kind of resolves the Iranian problem.
I mean, it does feel... I know I put this in the article as well, but it does feel to some extent like he really is trying to redraw the map.
Yes.
I think I compared him to someone who's playing a game of Risk.
Yes.
I'm just going to take Greenland over here, and then I'm going to do something in Iran, and I'm going to get rid of the president of Venezuela. These are all pretty dramatic actions or things which are being contemplated, which would have felt pretty alien to much US foreign policy in the last few years.
Well, absolutely. And I think this is a good test for Christians. We do not need to slavishly agree with everything that the president does, even if we like some of what he does. If we don't agree, then we should and we can say so. I mean, I'm fascinated. We prayed about the situation the Sunday after this happened. I was leading the service, and I did follow the pattern of the imprecatory Psalms in praying that the evil regime would be brought down. However, I then immediately pivoted to praying about families that had lost loved ones.
Yeah.
And you don't hear any of that from Trump. It's all about how what I've done is brilliant, what I've done is excellent. And actually, as a Christian, I want to say, I'm not comfortable with your tone, I'm not comfortable with your rhetoric, and there's that there's that clear megalomania, which the Bible is very clear. God opposes the proud, gives grace to the humble.
Yeah, and I guess that just to round off on Trump, we really believe, don't we, as Christians, that justice matters to God. And we see his heart for the widow.
Yes.
We need plenty of those currently in Iran, and the orphan, and the foreigner, and the poor. And when I look at Donald Trump, I don't see someone who has God's vision for what justice looks like. I see someone who has his own definitions, where he will say, I've done what a wonderful job. Here is a just Iran, but it won't be anything like that at all. And the question which I think I have to ask, and I said this to a group at All Souls last week, when I was speaking or something, is, okay, yes, we believe that God one day will put all things right. We believe that he is totally just. In the here and now, do I believe that Donald Trump is a man who's going to affect a just and lasting peace in the Middle East? Because I'm really sorry, I struggle to see that based on everything so far.
And I think this is where humility is so important, because the really scary thing, I think, is if I believe in the sovereignty of God, and I do, then it's hidden from me the instrument, if indeed there is one, that God will use. If indeed before Christ returns there will be peace in the Middle East. It may not happen. Jesus is so clear, isn't he? Until he comes again, there will be wars and rumors of wars. And we're living that now. And I think any time a conflict like this erupts, the fragility of world peace and world order and our own sanctuary is disturbed. I think it is a reminder to us as Christians how flabby and comfortable we can become in the West, where we're so used to peace and we don't have missiles raining down upon us. How thankful we should be, but how we should never take it for granted. That could very easily change.
Well, yeah, and I think we are really outliers, aren't we, in the West currently, in this period in history, in the place where we live, in not generally having had to ever really deal with conflicts within our lifetime. So yes, our grandparents might still have distant memories of World War II.
Yes.
But those memories are fading.
Yeah.
And so this feels very alien, but we know from the Bible that war is a complex thing, again, which affects a lot of people. If you read something like Lamentations, you see the impact it has upon civilians, or Jesus even talks about it himself. So when Jesus is predicting Jerusalem falling, he talks about the impact it will have upon pregnant women and nursing mothers. And war is not a simple, straightforward thing. And Christians have talked about whether we should get involved in it for hundreds of years. And I know we're going to get on to just war in a moment. John Stott sort of boiled it down to kind of three main questions. I know Just War Theory has 7 or 8. But his 3 ones were, its cause must be righteous, which in this one, we agree that the regime was an evil regime. Does that mean this is the right way about it? Not sure. Secondly, its means must be controlled. I think starting to get a little bit more sceptical. Thirdly, this is the big one, its outcome must be predictable. And if there has been a war which is not predictable, it feels like this is it.
And if we were to add just some of the other categories, because really what Scott did was he sort of summarised in 3 there's different versions of just war, but for example, you could add in, is there legitimate authority enacting this? And I think there are question marks there. Certainly if you are a disciple of international law, there are big question marks there, although...
Yeah, we can get on to that.
That is interesting, because I think either you take international law to be a sort of shibboleth that you cannot ever go against.
Which feels like Keir Starmer's approach as a lawyer himself.
And yet at the same time, actually some European leaders who are not reactionaries are basically saying international law worked for a different world and we're in a completely different context now.
And I think I do have some sympathy for that view.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you read Nigel Biggar's piece. But
I did for the Spectator,
yeah,
yes.
I found it really quite helpful.
Yeah.
So he pointed out rightly that if the US or Israel was basically to ever seek permission to attack a region, Russia and or China would say no.
Yeah.
And so you look at things like back in the late 90s when there was ethnic cleansing of Muslims in Kosovo by Serbian troops. The UN Security Council would have not been able to authorise military intervention even in that case because Russia would say no.
So I agree with that. And then I think the other thing it says is, is this a last resort? Well, I think that's questionable when negotiations, we don't know, but there was some suggestions that they were making progress, and that's not just from the Iranians. That was also from other other countries who were observing were more inclined to say that there was progress. At the same time, this is a duplicitous regime, so that's an interesting one.
Yeah, I guess to be fair, just to give him his due, Mr. Trump would have said, well, Iran was just about to get a nuclear weapon. So that is his justification, which he used.
For sure. And then reasonable chance of success, which you've kind of touched on. And then proportionality. And it's always difficult to assess, but especially nowadays, because I think weaponry is so much more sophisticated.
Yeah.
So there is a greater degree of targeting that goes on, I think, than in previous wars, because that is now possible.
Yeah.
So then a whole interesting question of the use of artificial intelligence already in this war. We found ourselves in a really ironic and actually kind of tragic situation where America, who is under Trump, has not been Ukraine's best friend, asking the Ukrainians for help because Iran responded by sending very cheaply made, with Russian technology, I believe, drones sort of all over the Middle East. And the US were kind of like, oh, wait, Ukrainians have got experience of dealing with this when they come over from Russia, right? Let's see how they can help us.
Yeah.
So I think that's the other thing. Is one of the tragedies of this war is it's diverting attention away from a war that has actually been going on for 4 years and is much longer and is much closer to our own borders.
And that is so often the way, isn't it? It is conflicts which have been going on for a long time get forgotten.
Yes.
Whether that is Ukraine or whether at points it's been Israel-Gaza has been forgotten as well. I guess to go back to the question of the future, we've already touched on Iran, and essentially the West kick-started something, and then it couldn't see it through.
Yeah,
and it didn't really foresee the consequences of what it did either, because by virtue of getting involved in the way it did within that sort of region, I think you could justifiably draw some sort of line between that and then the rise of Islamic states. Also within the Middle East.
Well, I mean, ISIS being the prime example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, I think, for civilians in any country to feel particularly grateful to the country which is bombing them, even if they say that they're coming as liberators, because it's not often going to feel like that.
No.
And particularly if you see people get killed, well, that is the kind of thing which potentially pushes you down a particular route. And already, actually, last weekend, there were headlines again in the UK about people being arrested. I mean, the code essentially was for terrorism-related offences. Some, I think, one even arrested in Watford. And so I do worry about the outcome of this. We've already seen, say, over the conflict in Gaza, the rise of sectarianism here in the UK. To assassinate what is effectively the most senior religious figure for Shiite Muslims is a pretty inflammatory move.
It is, yeah.
And you think, how is this going to end? Because we haven't seen a clear plan that it's going to end from Donald Trump. And it feels like the kind of thing which he might do is just say, we've done a great job, the war's over. And he's already basically saying it's almost finished.
Yeah. But
so what's the exit plan?
Exactly. And also that desire to control everything and that failure to recognize that there is a higher power than his.
Completely.
And I think that ultimately that is our refuge as Christians, isn't it? It's always taking some comfort in the mighty providence of God, in the sovereignty of the Lord over the hearts of all people. And there is an inscrutability there. The secret things belong to the Lord. We can't pry into them. We don't know everything that he's doing. What we do know is that he is well capable, as he has been doing, of growing his church, advancing his kingdom in the midst of persecution. Yeah. And I think that shapes then how we pray. We can pray for regime change. We can pray for a restraint of violence. We can pray, I think, especially that this does not descend into a bloody civil war, as basically happened in Iraq. Yeah. We can pray to, for example, that there be real spiritual awakening, that the church would be strengthened, would be protected. We can pray for godly leaders because they're going to need discipling. And all of these things, I think they're just some of the ways that publicly we can pray. And I think it is really important when conflicts like this break out that we do model how to pray in our churches from the front to help people understand this is how you can do it.
Completely. And actually, I mean, you mentioned earlier how we started with something which we do know. We then went on to various things which we don't know. Yeah. The one thing which you always do know, which you can keep on coming back to, is the character of God.
Yes, it does not change. Like shifting shadows.
Exactly. So I mean, I've been really comforted by Psalm 46, actually. Was that where you were going?
Battle him of the Reformation. Right. That's what Martin Luther called it. Yeah.
I mean, I've always loved Psalm 46. Yeah. But it feels really apparent when it feels like there's real uncertainty. Yeah. We will not fear though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. And verse 6, really great. Again, nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. God lifts his voice, the earth melts. And of course it goes on to talk about war and how God is the one who can make war cease. He breaks the bow, he shatters the spear, he burns the shields. And then verse 10, be still and know that I am God.
Absolutely. And more, we can build on that even further, can't we? Because one of the images in the Old Testament is of God turning instruments of war into plowshares.
Yeah, Isaiah. Yeah.
Isaiah 2, the mountain of the Lord shall rise in the latter days, and the nations shall go up into it. They shall learn of war no more. And we know that Revelation 21, when the end times come, the coming of the Lord Jesus from heaven, God coming to make his home again with us on earth, will be for the healing of the nations. Yeah. And sin, sighing, sorrow, death, defeated, vanquished, banished, removed, endless joy for all the redeemed, and so on. So you're absolutely right. Psalm 46, it helps us in the present, but also begins to push us forward. And that's always a biblical response to any conflict, is to go, wait, big picture, where are we headed? We know where we're headed. Yeah. We know what the next big event in world history is going to be beyond the wars and rumors of wars, is the coming of Christ. But we also know, and I know we've talked about this so often, that's a comfort. But then when you remember that world has already begun, that's an even greater comfort. Yeah. Because God never leaves a work unfinished.
Completely. And one thing which I was thinking about last week was, obviously we have endless academics and philosophers and theorists, and there'll be people analysing military strategy and kind of modelling different outcomes. And on one level, that's great. But at the same time, as Christians, like the ordinary Christian in the pew, understands something more deep and true about the story of the world than any amount of military modelling.
And this is where your biblical theology, again, you can come back to it time and time again, whatever you're facing. There is a story, isn't there? We know it's creation, a good world, a very good world. We know it's fall, and everything we see wrong with the world is explained by that. We know that then there's redemption, and we know that there's consummation as well. And I think finding restoration, finding hope in that is so important. Yeah, I think there's no doubt we will revisit this, because I don't think this is going to stop anytime soon. Yeah, and I think that it's really important to say that whenever we're talking about these things as well, and this isn't just an afterthought, that in our prayers, in our reflections, it's important to think as well about those who are losing and have lost loved ones. Completely. Because there are American service people who have died. There are Iranians who have lost loved ones.
Who are made in the image of God just as much as someone in the UK or from America.
And I think that's so important. And that too must be part of our public prayers, that I think it is right to pray for comfort for those who've lost loved ones and so on. I think, as ever with these massive topics, you just feel, I don't know if you feel this as well, you just feel like you are scrambling for things that you can be clear on. I think when we root that in the Bible, we can be more confident. Yeah. And then I think it's right to talk about the other things, but hopefully what we've been able to model is to do so by owning we don't know, and therefore be clear about what are we sort of not as confident about. And I hope that's been helpful to people, that we've tried to model that, because what I see too often in these situations is people being very confident about things they can't know anything about. And I think what you just said was so helpful. The ordinary Christian doesn't need to be an expert in geopolitics. They can just be an expert in God is sovereign, God is on the throne, God has got this, so we can pray to him.
I know you've got some potential prayer points for us.
I do.
Why don't we move on to this?
Yeah, let me just run through a few of these. This is from a pastor, an Iranian pastor, so I think even more helpful. And by the way, Open Doors have some great resources about the church in Iran and how you can pray. So do check out Open Doors as well. We can pray for the protection and perseverance of believers, especially converts who may face danger from multiple different places. Pray for wise and courageous local shepherds, for leaders of conviction, humility, and doctrinal clarity. Pray for the raising up of new leaders so the church is not left immature or driven by personalities. Pray for discernment among God's people in Iran against false gospels, prosperity teaching, emotionalism, nationalism, or liberal theology. We can pray that any new freedoms that come would be used for gospel proclamation and not wasted. Pray that Christ would be openly confessed as Lord in Iran. Wouldn't that be amazing? That'd be like countries like Albania, where you couldn't do that, but now you can. We can pray too that there'd be hope and freedom found ultimately in the gospel, that people wouldn't place their ultimate hope in political freedom, but their ultimate hope would be in the freedom that's found through Jesus. And I come back to, again, praying for restraint of violence. And I think we could add to that 1 Timothy 2, pray for Trump. Pray for Netanyahu.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pray for world leaders. Pray for Starmer. Pray for the cabinet as they grapple. You know, it's easy for us to criticize.
Yeah.
But my goodness, the working hours that they would have had to put in, the pressure. And of course, another impact it has here is government attention is diverted from many other international issues, domestic issues. So pray for those who are going into the Cobra meetings where you can't take any food and you can't take any water, and you're often there for hour upon hour upon hour. Pray for strength, pray physical strength, pray for sleep. You know, that's a simple thing. You could pray for the Prime Minister that he would be granted sleep so that he's refreshed when he has to make these big decisions.
Yeah, and I guess really do pray for wisdom, because one of the things which I think we could probably both agree is that there are no clearly obvious right paths.
No.
Whatever you do has trade-offs.
Yes.
And okay, you might do well at one thing, but then actually something else will happen, or something will happen which you didn't foresee.
I totally agree.
And it will be very easy for anyone in 20 years' time to say, well, they should have done this or they shouldn't have done this.
Absolutely.
It is not easy when you're in the middle of it. So absolutely pray for wisdom.
Yeah, I agree. Well, as I said, I think we'll come back to this, but I hope it's been helpful just to kind of sketch it out, an initial response, some Christian principles that can shape our understanding, shape our thinking. It's been great to record while on residential in this wonderful environment. I can't promise the next time will be anywhere near as dramatic as this one. Thank you as ever to Isaac, our digital media producer of the Engage podcast. Please do like this video. Please ask us any questions, make any comments. Don't forget, later in the year, live recording, Engage podcast. I've had a request already for VIP access. We will consider your request. But look forward to being back with you very shortly, very, very soon. Peter, as ever, a pleasure.
Good to see you, James.
Good to see you, and we'll see you very soon. Goodbye.
Take care.